There.
Go to that. Go to that.
Keep going.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So if you want to start?
No, I want to start with.
Go back at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. I will be back there helping. Oh, did I put this in a room?
Oh, there's that.
I put this in a room. Let me look. We are. Good to go. Just stand behind the blue.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, there's no mark. There's no mark.
Okay, that's good. I think I can get out. So I don't have a microphone, so can everybody hear me okay? If I get too loud, need to go up, somebody just give me a thumbs going up. My name is Susan Turner. I am a LBSW licensed bachelor social worker through the state of Tennessee. I hold a master's degree from Liberty University of Marriage and Family Therapy. And I have like over 20 plus years of working in child welfare, especially with kids in foster care. So I don't know where the two little young ladies that went that were around here taking pictures, but they belong to me. And I just wanted to to thank them for giving up a Saturday to come down here and help out the Tennessee Healthcare Campaign Committee. And I appreciate them so much. So we're going to get started. I'm going to talk about adverse childhood experiences. Has anybody heard of that? Know about it? I'm pretty sure. So I did not, even working for the state of Tennessee Department of Children's Services, didn't understand it. In 2020, like everybody else, it kind of rocked my world, not because of COVID, but my mother died unexpectedly. She had Alzheimer's. We got to see her the day before. We did a Zoom because my son was finally, thank God, graduating from college. So for y'all that have put kids through college, you know what I'm talking about. And so we did a virtual Zoom. And the next morning, she unexpectedly passed away. So to say that I was in a deep spot, I was, but I was working on my doctorate degree and I was studying alcoholism in African-American men, and it kept popping up adverse childhood experiences. I didn't know what that was. So I reached out to a couple of colleagues that I work with and said, hey, do we know about this? And they were like, I think we may have had to do a training, but if you work for the state or you have to do those mandatory trainings, you're just going to click through. You really don't know what you're talking about and hope that somebody else got the answers to what's going on. So I started digging and digging and digging and found myself into a rabbit hole with ACES, and a light bulb kind of went on, and it took me down this journey that I'm blessed to be on. So right now, we're just going to give a quick overview of ACES, and let's pray technology is going to be in my favor today.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anna and Felipe tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of the population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
So one of the things that we learned through that little presentation right there about the ACE study is that it proved that the hypothesis that they were trying to study was right. It started out as a weight loss study, but they noticed that even though some were successful, they went back or they dropped out and they gained weight or they were smoking and doing different things. And so they ended up going back to finding out what ACEs mean. So adversity early in life increases physical, mental, and behavioral problems later in life, which can lead to death. And that's what they were talking about. So not only was adversity found to be common in the population, they were also co-occurring, which meant they were experiencing one or more adversities in about 87% of experiencing at least one or more. This combination of findings make ACEs one of the leading, if not the leading determinant of health and social well-being in our nation. So when I started looking at ACEs, the pyramid in the green was the very first one. And it started at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, but it never gave a realization of how we immediately got there. Why is at the bottom of it? So some other studies start taking place, like the Philadelphia study, which went to the urban part of Philadelphia, some other studies around the world. And so they were like, hey, we're missing some components here. We just can't jump straight to adverse childhood experiences. So they said the basis of it was generational trauma. For me, that was huge. That rang bells, because where did it start? Where did it go? And so then you will notice that the next one up is social, economic, and local context, which is like poverty, lack of response, violence in the neighborhood. So it took away from just starting at ACEs, but put in 2 additional layers. So I became very intrigued with generational trauma. But the one thing that ACEs has taught us, and you all said y'all were familiar with ACEs, it changed our dialogue when we talk about people. So we started out with, anybody know what he's saying to her, what it looks like he's saying? Y'all got to be a little interactive here. So, you know, yeah, or what is wrong with you? I swear that is what he is saying to her, like, what is wrong with you? So it kind of shifted us away to like putting that blame on the person to going to, what do y'all think they're saying here? Yes, what has happened to you? So it shifted that focus to what has happened to you. So the more I started researching, the more I started digging, and the more rabbit holes I went and driving my family crazy, taking over the dining room table, I was like, the one question was, an additional question was, what if it didn't start with you? What if it goes beyond you? So here it is. What if it started generations before we ever knew what was going on in our systems? So let's explore historical trauma. So I'm going to read this definition, because at first it was very basic and very broad. I kind of came together and put it together. Historical trauma refers to a complex and collective trauma experience over time and across generations by a group of people who share an identity, affiliation, or circumstances. Many scholars and publications have described the generational aspect of historical trauma as transgenerational, intergenerational, and multi-generational, or cross-generational, and have introduced concepts such as soul wound or post-traumatic slave syndrome. So when we think about historical trauma, there are 3 primary elements. There has to be trauma, has to be shared by people, and it has to span generations. So I give this disclaimer. I talk about African Americans because I am African American. Ding, ding. So I can't talk about anybody else's trauma. I can only talk about, and I've researched that trauma that affects African Americans, because I feel like when it comes to healthcare and social aspect, we are one of the minorities that kind of get left out, or we get forgotten about, or we lack that appropriate care. So when we think about historical trauma and those 3 primary elements, what do you think about when it comes to African Americans? Slavery. What else we got? Poverty. What else we got? What'd you say? Yes, segregation. So I put up here, we have slavery, we have segregation, oppression, and racism. We are still dealing with those today. I know a lot of people want to talk about, well, slavery was so many years ago. Well, really that wasn't far long ago. Racism, we experience it every single day. So in February of 2000, Auburn University did a study that concluded
Oh,
African Americans who reported more
good.
experiences with racial discrimination age faster,
That's all right.
noting that only a social and moral dilemma, but also a public.
Who is this?
Thank
Ah,
Somebody's talking on here and I can hear
I-
something. So encountering racism led to
I
higher
do
levels of
that.
stress.
She is celebrating over 5 days her 80th birthday.
Neat. Okay. Maybe that'll work. So I don't even know where I got left off at, but encountering racism led to higher levels of stress. And we all know what stress does to our bodies. Internalized stress to race-based manifests into more serious conditions of trauma. Racism contributed to Black people getting sicker at younger ages and having more serious illnesses. So as I was researching, there were a couple of books. I don't get paid to promote them. I don't even think these people even know who I am, but I throw this out there. There are 3 books that I encourage everybody to go and read. One is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and I'm going to show you a small clip about that. The second one is Grandmother's Hand, which is a phenomenal book, and it talks about some experiences. It was a hard read for me. These are not easy books to go. And the other one, I believe, is Soul Wound, but I have them in my bag to make sure if somebody wants to know. But they're not easy reads. I would read a little bit, put them down, cry a lot, pick it back up, put it back down, cry a lot, because our people experienced a lot. So I'm going to show this video about post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Post-traumatic slaves is an expression that really looks at one of the things that's difficult is their first response. Oh my God, that happens. We're talking about
Oh.
so beaten, raped,
Logan, do you know how to get this to play up here? Playing on here, but it didn't play. Okay.
Where, huh? Right here, right? Oh, what is stop? Yeah. I can do from back up there.
Okay.
I can come back up here again.
Okay. Gotta love technology. It does, right? What did he say? It's the gift and the curse.
and this is the name of the book.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yes. Hold on 1 second. While he's back there doing, I'm gonna step away. I'll grab him and show. Also, let me just put out, if you need social worker CEUs, just come and fill this out, put your name on there, and I'll just leave that right there. So don't mind my tabs and sticky notes in there, but, so this one is my grandmother's hand right here.
That's right.
Thank you. Black fatigue, phenomenal. And then post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
I was just letting the people on the call see the video. Mhm.
Yeah.
It's all about us. Yeah, forget these people who are doing it remotely. Geez.
I see.
Round 3.
Okay.
Post-traumatic slaves is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma.
No. No.
One of the things that's difficult is their first response. Oh my God, that happens. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes. So 300 years of trauma, no help, free, no help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, and we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families, children, generations of folks who experience war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery as a real clear, long, enduring process. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as well cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behavior. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a Black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The Black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fairs, I was an astronaut. She just oozed it. She realized the Black mother's son is actually excelling. And she says, wait a minute. Your son, the one that's really coming along. And the Black mother responds, oh my God, it's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience, it doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs, goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody Black knows that even though the Black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this Black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shitless. He can't work. Because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, you know, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of him? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You can just hear about something horrific happening in something you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. You know, all of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're gonna fold in things that you just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened. There was a point where there were African-American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adult because they saw so much death. Then they started planning their funerals like in 13, 12. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on them. And while we look at general stress, you know, finances, illnesses, all these different things. How about being Black? How does factoring in being Black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it because you see it habitual, you socialize, it becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you can address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can do. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop and get solved. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where the part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or a pill. It's in fairness, justice, and safety. And equity, we got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and both those systems together. And it cannot singularly by themselves affect you. They have to be done.
So I don't know what y'all's role is, capacity, your job, whatever. Normally I teach this and speak about this. The presentation's going like 2 hours long. So I did it for an organization in Virginia called Communities and Schools. And I asked them.
Just stand over here when you're talking. So
Oh, sorry. So I asked them how many of them have met with a parent, African-American parent, and you notice that when you praise their child, they come back with something negative to say. And so a lot of them hung their head and I was like, no, this is a safe space. You can be honest, because I was that parent. I was that parent until I started studying this and I ran across this video and reading it in the book. And it kind of broke me a little bit because keep going. So like I told you, that one right there belongs to me. That's her best friend. I love them both dearly. She's about to enter her sophomore year of college at East Tennessee State. I have a son who is has a bachelor's of social work degree, also in law school, works for a law office in Johnson City as well. So but when somebody would comment me about or compliment me about my kids, my first defense, including that one, is, oh my God, they're wearing me out. They're so expensive. They're da 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 da. It was always something negative until I started reading why that was my defense mechanism for my kids. Like, why couldn't I say, yes, they are. They're amazing. I did great. I put forth all this effort and they turned out to be good human beings. But so the more I kept reading and the more I kept understanding, so I was like just not wrapping my head around it. And I was like emotional and I was crying and I'm like, why? So in one of the books, My Grandmother's Hands, they talk about how if the slave's firstborn child was a male, they coddled that baby. They wanted that male to be weak and not strong, because the minute it showed a sense of being strong or smart or could work the fields, that baby was stripped, sold, or put out in the fields. And so that's where a lot of the baby wearing on the back comes from too, like, I want to keep and protect this baby. And I didn't realize I can speak from my experience that was my defense mechanism. I mean, we all lived through George Floyd and we all educated. I know I was scared for my son to go out. Hands at 10 to 2, you get pulled over. Here's your license. Here's your insurance. Don't reach. Don't do this. It's our defense mechanism from the trauma that we have endured over the years. So right here it says, generation after generation, Black people have stored trauma and intense survival energy, and we have passed it down to our children. For well over 300 years, the Black person has systematically been brutalized, mutilated, murdered, abused, and demonized by guns, whips, chains, shootings, lynchings, policies, laws, and social norms. I'm also going to go and include, somebody brought it to my attention the last time I spoke, dogs. And they were like, African Americans used to be scared of dogs. And I was like, oh my gosh, let me go back and research. Well, when a slave escaped, what did they send to go look for them? The dogs, the hounds. So for a long time, I was like, wonder why that took us forever to get a dog. But that is that trauma that we have endured. So a coworker and I started working on another presentation because I told her the story of this picture. And I said, when you look at this picture, you either look like it's a family, some siblings, but do they really belong to each other? Are they really related? Because they were sold over and over and over again. So we started talking about the success rate and what generational trauma has to do with Black men and their success in college. And it stemmed from this picture right here, because I was telling her, my heart is just breaking. And she was like, Susan, you get so emotional. And I do, because we don't know if that man belongs to that family because they were sold so many times. If you worked the field and if you bred good babies, you were sold to the highest bidder. And that's what it was. So for Black men, it was hard to attach or hard to watch because you could be a father, a brother, a husband, or cousin, but you had to sit back and watch your wives being raped, your kids beaten, or being sold. So sometimes they have that defense mechanism is, I'm not going to attach because the minute I do, I'm sold, or somebody is taken away from me, or I'm killed. So we started researching, and we're going to present that at ETSU, the effects of generational trauma and how that's being passed down. Now, my great-grandmother was a midwife. You didn't ask her questions about it. She never talked about it. She was wonderful. She was great. I had my son in Beckley, West Virginia, born and raised, true coal miner's daughter. So my dad is still down there in their mines. Anyway, I had my son, and he was huge. He was almost 10 pounds, and I wanted to breastfeed, but I couldn't. So we're all adults. I'm going to talk about this for a minute. And so I was young, so I did not realize, like, when your milk came in, you get engorged and it really hurts and you get a fever. I didn't know all that stuff. So my mom calls my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and they come, and she makes this concoction. Don't nobody ask me what it was because I don't know. I wish I would have got the information. And she had me drink it, and then she did this thing called bounding. Somebody else told me they had heard of that. I had never even heard of that. So she bound me up, but we had to be separated, me and the baby, for like 24 hours. I'm a first-time mom. This is my baby in my early 20s, but you just didn't question granny and grandma, so you just went and did what you was told. But the next morning I woke up, of course, baby is fine, and I'm back to being healthy. But she would have those little remedies for us from being a midwife. But during slavery, Black mothers were forced to nurse white babies, and this was what they call wet nursing. As Black women wet nursed the white babies, they were not allowed to breastfeed their own babies. So therefore, they had to like start them on cow's milk really early, which we know that's a big no-no. Pot juice. Does anybody know what pot juice is? No, pot juice. You called it. Oh, okay. Okay, well, I researched it, and it was like, the slaves got the leftover parts of the pigs and the cows, and they boiled it and they ate it. I guess that's where chitterlings came from, and pig's feet and all that good stuff. But they would take that juice from there and feed the baby.
Sounds like a glorified broth.
Yeah, now we want it, right? You can go to the health food store and get it. But back then, it wasn't as healthy, I guess, as it is now, especially to feed a newborn baby. So then the death rate, the infant mortality in African American babies went up because of the lack of nutrition. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what impact does historical trauma have on Black people? So Black people are 44% more likely to die from a stroke. Black people are 20% more likely to have asthma and 3 times more likely than white people to die from it. Black people are 40% more likely to die from heart disease, and Black women are 40% more likely to die from breast cancer and 52% more likely to die from cervical cancer than white women. This next one just gets to me. Black women are 243% more likely than white women to die from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes. College-educated Black women have worse birth outcomes than white women who have not finished high school. Now, I don't know how many of y'all on social media, you have seen it. I know of 5 recent cases of Black women dying during childbirth, after childbirth, going home, going back to the hospital, getting sent back home, going back to the hospital and dying. It is the lack of care. So according to the Families USA, a national nonpartisan voice for healthcare consumers in 2019, 61% of Black children have experienced at least one ACE compared to 40%. And Black children, again, are 61% more likely to attempt suicide as high schoolers as a result of depression. And that stems from lack of appropriate healthcare. So 2017, I got really sick, thought I was dying, knew I had stomach cancer, something was going on, kept going to the doctor, went to a male doctor. He looked at me and was like, yeah, I think you got cancer. No blood work, no physical check. I walk out, I'm bawling, I'm crying. Little nurse about this big, little doctor, she comes out, she's a white lady. And she said, are you okay? And I said, no, I'm not. He just told me I had cancer. And she said, what? What test? What have we done? I said, nothing. I just told him my symptoms. He told me that. And he was just really nonchalant about it. So she calmed me down. She said, I'm going to walk you up here. I'm going to put you under my schedule. And we're going to start from the basis. And I said, thank you. She took a moment to care, not look at me as a Black woman, but look at me as a woman and as a patient. So, because when I talk about this, everybody's like, well, we don't have representation that look like us, but we have allies that are going to take care of us like they are us. She is my ally. I tell her all the time. I talk about her every time I give this speech, this presentation. So we ran every test known to man. I've had every treatment that you could have, every colonoscopy, endoscopy, whatever you want, colonoscopy done. Everything kept coming back clear, no lie. So one day I was working still with Department of Children's Services on my way to court to testify. And she called, let me take this back. So my daughter back there made the softball team. We were going to go celebrate. I'll never forget, Black Panther was at the movies and we scored tickets. Yes. So we ate pizza. Within 10 minutes, I was crawling. Something was not right. So my husband was like, let me take you to the ER. I said, no. Go ahead and take the girls to the movies. I'll be fine. This too shall pass because we've been doing this for a couple of months now. So next morning, my doctor calls me. And I said, I was going to call you after I got out of court. And she said, Susan, she said, I was in the shower and I started praying, asking God to give me some direction on how to treat you. And she said, have you ever heard of celiac disease? I said, nope. She said, you know what gluten is? I said, nope. She said, you like pasta, you like bread. I was like, I'm Black. We fry everything. I love me some pasta and flour everywhere. She said, well, I need you to research it. She said, but tomorrow morning, I need you to come by here. It's a simple blood test. She said, I think you have celiac disease. And the reason why haven't tested you before, because guess what? It ain't common in African Americans per textbook. So I go to court, I do what I gotta do. What's the next thing I do after I get back to the office? What we all gonna do? We gonna Google, figure out what's going on, what's the diagnosis, what's my prognosis, how long I got to live, what I can and cannot eat. So that moment on, I was like, oh my God, here it is. So the next morning I go get my blood work. She put a rush on it, comes back, and guess what? I have celiac disease. She said, the bad part is it's hereditary. It's passed down. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is what my mother had. Or has, because she couldn't eat certain things and it would upset her stomach and then she would break out. So I tell my kids, I said, listen, we figured out what's wrong with mom. You got to go get tested. My son is grown in quotation marks, and I mean grown in quotation marks. He said, Mom, I can't do it. I don't want to know. I can't give up beer. He said, that's sweet. I can't do it. I said, fine, I can't force you. So I take her. Of course, she pops up positive too. But without her being an ally and advocating for me to get appropriate health care, had I have walked out and just kept going, I don't know where I would be today. So I thank her every time I see her. We go see her and she's like, stop telling people I saved your life. I said, well, you did, because mentally I was not in a good headspace. So what does this have to do with the state of Tennessee? So adverse childhood experiences can increase a person's risk of health, social, and economic problems throughout life. I tried to find some updated data for us, but this is all I could come up with. In 2017, ACES among Tennessee adults led to an estimated $5.2 billion in direct medical costs and lost productivity from employees missing work. ACEs are associated with risky health behaviors and poor health outcomes, even after accounting for other factors. Over half of adult Tennesseans reported at least one ACE between 2014 and 2017, and about 17% had experienced 4 or more ACEs. So there's an updated ACEs questionnaire that the state of Tennessee does not use. It still uses the same basic 10 questions. Why? I don't know. So even in 2017, these numbers could be higher than what they even are reporting today. So what can we do? Understanding the effects of trauma. We know that trauma can also change how we view ourselves due to overactivation of the stress response system. And individuals begin to start feeling powerless and marginalized. So according to Dr. Nadine Burke, if you've never heard of her or seen her on YouTube, I suggest you go watch her. She is phenomenal. There are 6 things that needed to heal the stress response system. So we need nutrition. We know our kids now, they are lacking nutrition. The cost of food is just outrageous. Exercise, sleep, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships. So we're going to try to move from that unsafe to being I am trapped, I have no choice, I can't do this, to moving them to I can do this, I'm in charge of myself, and I have options. So remember, stressful experiences, when buffered by a responsive adult relationship, can help build resilience. I used to hate that word when I worked at DCS and we would remove kids and bring them in. They'd be like, kids are resilient. Now, what are we giving them to be resilient with? They need a stable home environment, a protective adult. So we need to make sure that they have those adult relationships. And it is through these times of stress that the presence of a competent adult can create a buffer to help the child build resilience. So what can we do? We can build resilience. Like I said before, support from a parent, school, friends, community, resources that help buffer negative consequences, feeling safe at home, having high self-esteem, possessing a variety of adaptive and flexible coping skills. All that goes back to appropriate health care, being trauma-informed and trauma-focused. So I always like to end with 10 steps towards healing. for everybody. So like I said, when we were talking about trauma informed and trauma focused, truthfulness, tell the truth. It is the foundation for our health. Speaking up for yourself and letting them know what's going on. Know yourself, know your history and personal legacy. If you are fortunate to have a grandparent or be a grandparent or a great grandparent, tell those stories, pass them down to generation, because they are just so beneficial and you cannot get that history back. Preserve memories for those to come. Look beyond healing and seek to be healthy. So I got my gut healed, but then we had to stay healthy. Little did I know that gluten-free food had an abundance of sugar in there to offset the gluten-free. If y'all ever had some of the gluten-free food, it is not some of my favorite, but hey, we got to be healthy. So we learn to adapt and cut back and make changes so that we can stay healthy and build esteem that is healthy and accurate. I have my 15-year-old nephew with me, and I tell him all the time, please stop coming to Aunt Susu telling me what happened on TikTok. It is not real. Just let it go. But he's 15. Control your inner world, manage stress and conflict. Self-care is self-preservation. Cultural preparedness for the preparations for the future. Build upon those strengths, past and current. Model health. Be the healing that you see. Be an advocate for those that you know are in a marginalized community. And look in the mirror. Growth and change are continuous, and it starts within us. And thank you. That's the end. Do you have any questions, comments? But thank you all. Oh. Okay. Stand there for 20 seconds. Okay.
I noticed that, stress is a silent killer. And so I noticed that when in baby boomers, which I am, many of us suffer with hypertension. And I couldn't see the connection of our past and our histories with that. So that resonated with me.
Yeah. And one of the things that I had to cut this down, so I talk about it a lot too, is like, when you go to the doctor and you fill out that health sheet, you have to give history of your parents. Did anybody suffer from high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer? Well, why aren't we asking those other questions? Like, has anybody suffered from mental health? We know African Americans have that post-traumatic slave syndrome. That's a given. That's our history, and it's passed down. And we all know, if you haven't read that book, that the body does keep the score. So even though it may not affect you, but what if it affects your next generation or the generation after that? That's where it stems from. And I like to think of it as the tree and those roots that are grounded in there. So if we don't supplement that soil to nurture those roots, it's going to continue to spread out through that tree.
I remember growing up as a child, and my family, we got the government food. And so I remember my mother and how she was kind of like institutionalized or suffering from this as we were standing in line. And she always would take me with her because I would act right.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were in line and we were waiting on our time to get all of this food. And Republicans really wanted that government cheese. They loved it, but
that cheese made some good macaroni.
But anyway, we were in line to get that stuff, and I noticed that people were hurling insults at my mother in a sexual, derogative way. And she knew that she was fending for the family, and she wouldn't say nothing. And I was like, "Wow, did you hear that?" She said, "Shut your mouth and be quiet," but she was, I guess, had to succumb to that stuff so that she could provide for a family. We're very poor, and I'm a living example that you don't have to be what you see, what you hear. But I understood that, and I wanted to make sure that as I became a man, that I would not fall into that, It's hard to sometimes if you live in a certain area, especially in the rural areas, where there's not a lot of people like you, your strength is in your numbers.
numbers.
You got to have a certain courage to come forward, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I noticed that my mother was taking a lot of stuff because the family, you know, meals depended.
Yeah. And when we talk about trauma, I was in a horrific car accident. I mean, horrific. I just thank God that I'm still here and had to be cut out, jaws of life, and just tore my rotator cuff. But I started suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I did. And so I could hear the car because it hit and hydroplaned and flipped and then slid and it hit the guardrail. So it was metal on metal. So in the middle of the night, I would wake up and I could hear it. And the only way I could drown it out was to start vacuuming like at 2:00 in the morning. So I was obsessed with watching the Weather Channel because it rained. So if it was a drop of rain, oh my God, my stomach hurt, my head hurt. I don't feel good. I got a migraine. I could lie better than anybody to get out of going anywhere. And I wouldn't get in the car. I was stressed. It was awful. So I called my mom and I said, now she was the rock of our family, praying woman, minister, everything. And I said, Mom, I need help. She said, we're praying. I want y'all to keep praying, but I need help. I'm struggling. And if I don't get help, I'll never get back in the car. I told them I was lying all the time. If I even thought, I watched the Weather Channel religiously. And I said, if I even thought it was going to rain, I wouldn't go anywhere. That was just my mechanism to dealing with this. And she said, no, you don't need that. And I couldn't understand. Like, she was very defensive about me going to go get mental health help. So I later found out, growing up in that rural small community, that as an African American, if you went and got mental health help, you were deemed crazy. And it followed you. So in her mind, she thought that was what was going to happen to me. And so she thought she was being protective of me. But I told her that we have got to get away from that stigma, especially in the African American community, because we have so many of us suffering. I was like, I've got to go get help, because if not, I will never get in the car again. I'm not going to drive again. I ain't coming to no family reunions. Everybody got to come here. This is my safety net. So I did go and get some help and get over it. But like you said, it's that generational trauma that's passed down in those community, like especially in the African American community, what is passed down. And like, I didn't know that that's what was in her mind. I was like, why is she so against it? I got to go. I need help. And I'm kind of like defensive and mad at her. But then one of my aunts explained that's what happened back then. And so she was under the impression that that would be what would happen to me. So
I'm not trying to hold the conversation,
That's
but I work with the Tennessee Healthcare Campaign, and just what you mentioned is the #1 issue in the BIPOC community now. And we are not really, we're reluctant about getting help because of that stigma that you're talking about. So we haven't got victory from that yet.
No.
As a matter of fact, it may even be getting stronger. So that we're trying to do a full court press on that to create an environment where you can get help. Just like blood pressure pills or pills for diabetes. There's a medicine for this, and you're not going to get hooked. It's to help you.
Yes.
You know, and so that's a big deal.
Yes. And I think the more we get out, and I just hope that I'm like helping one person, if anybody, to let them know, like, listen, I did it. Like I work in the school system now, and I tell kids all the time, there is nothing wrong with getting help. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I have anxiety, I need this, I need that. We need help. Don't suffer in silence, because then we're dealing with a whole generation of those that are, taking it even a step further. Yes.
This may be a strange question, but as a former advocate for breastfeeding, in years past, still talk about it a lot. I believe that it has traditionally been a very low rate of breastfeeding among Black women. Do you know anything about that or not? In my experience, it has been low. Now, it may have changed now, but after hearing you talk, I'm wondering if that's not only based on the fact of their economic situation that they had to go out and work, but is there also the stigma there attached to a Black woman breastfeeding because they were forced in slavery to nurse the white babies and not take care of their own, and so they feel badly that they were used that way, and that's why they don't do it anymore. You know, I never thought about that until you said.
Right. So, in one of these books, it talks about it, and I don't want to misquote or misrepresent that, but that's what it was talking about, was the low rate of African-American women who breastfeed. I have a sister who just had my nephew. He is amazing. And she is a strong advocate for breastfeeding, but and she breastfed my niece, but she has that luxury of working from home. Sometimes we don't have that luxury to breastfeed because then you have to go back to work so soon. So in the end, with this trauma that we have endured with wet nursing, that could be a holdback too.
And we know that breastfeeding is beneficial to the health of the baby in the future. They have
Yes.
less of this, less of that, and if it's not, and maybe that's even contributing more and more to the extra health problems in the life. It's all tied in.
Yes, it is.
Very-
Logan, you had a question?
You already touched on this a little bit, but Todd asked, how are you feeling about this now that it's several generations
How do I feel about
the awareness and how it's impacting everything?
impacted me?
Yes.
Oh, I am passionate. I just want to go out there and tell everybody about ACES, especially in the African American community. I don't want people to feel like, oh my God, she doesn't want to deal with anybody else. But I just feel like because we are so left out of everything. Like I was talking to a lady, a mother, and she was talking about her kid being on psychotropic medications for mental health. And I said, well, did they tell you every 3 months you need to go and get this child's blood work done? You need to check their kidney levels, their liver levels, creatine, protein, just different things. Because we all know kids grow, bodies change. And she said, no, I had no idea. And she said, and thank you for that. So for me, it's just made me more of an advocate to go out there and to bring awareness, to let everybody know that no, slavery is not our excuse. Slavery is what makes us us. So it's our reality. Yes. And it's going to continue to be our reality because now, so you got slavery, we got George Floyd going on and the dynamics of that. And then we got COVID, which is another aspect that's going to affect everybody in every different way from years to come. So I hope I answered that question. All right. Thank you all.
All right, so if everybody wants to come on back when they're ready, I think we're gonna be taking a little bit of a break for lunch. Self-care buffet, and we're gonna have a lunch, so we'll be resuming probably. If you want to stay logged on, you can stay logged on. If you want to jump off and leave and come back on, I'll be starting to man the Zoom probably about 1:15-ish, and so I'll start letting people into the rooms. And then use that, just remember to use that link you got this morning because the other one doesn't work. So, and then again, if you need me, my phone number is on your registration. So everything else looks good. And then so we're having some trouble with the completed